completed her CS education from the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India and Institute of Company Secretaries of India and ICMA from London. She worked as general manager at Johnson Matthey and managing director at Indica Ceramics Limited, advisory council member at EFI. She is an independent director and chairman for Audit Committee and member of CSR Committee at Toyota Financial Services, India. She is the founder of Brand Horizon, a brand consulting firm offering content management, brand strategy, and communication solution to SMEs and startup. It's pleasure to have you, ma'am. Our next guest for the event is Mr. Yashwant Sir, founder of Thick Shake Factory, one of the fastest growing QSR companies in the food and beverage space. He completed his MBA from the Xavier's Institute of Management, Bhubaneswar. I welcome you, sir. And our next guest and the moderator for the event is Mrs. Shivkala Ma'am, founder of ACT Talks, a passionate social entrepreneur building sustainable ventures. Ma'am is co-founder of Volo, Women's Powder Room, also worked as a deputy general manager at Tarfana Services LLC. She is among top 100 women transforming India by Niti Aayog, helping entrepreneurs and artists build and sustain their businesses. It is great to have you, ma'am. We all welcome you.
Thank you.
Now, I would like to hand over to Shivkala ma'am for moderating the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ekta. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction of the panelist. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be on the same screen. It's a pleasure to meet each one of you. And thank you, IIM Vishakhapatnam, for this opportunity. And a very good morning to all the boys and girls, or rather the good boys and the good girls, or who have joined us on a Saturday morning for an yet another interesting session. So to start the session, I start the session with I am Vishakhapatnam's motto, which is Vidya Param Devatam, which means knowledge is the supreme deity. And yes, for the same reason, today we've gathered to discuss on a hot topic that's been there for in 2020, that's duality of crisis. In this current scenario, we've seen certain businesses have boomed up suddenly, and some have, after a certain boom in their careers, they've just drastically come down. So today, through our panel discussion, we're going to discuss what can crisis be. So in 2020, we've seen that crisis can be an opportunity, and it can be a failure to the which to the word itself. I start this with a quote for people who've dealt with this crisis. The quote is from Victor Kiam, who's an American entrepreneur. He says, entrepreneurs are simply those who understand that there is a little difference between obstacle and opportunity and are able to turn both to their advantage. So, my first um, question would be to all the three panelists, if they can introduce, or rather brief us through their individual journeys of their careers. So I see that all three of our panelists hold a corporate background and then chose their entrepreneurial journey. So starting with Asha ma'am, can you please quickly tell us about your journey so far?
Sure. Thank you, Shivkala. And a very good afternoon to all my co-panelists and to the audience watching us. It's a privilege to be on this platform today. I have been a corporate professional for about 2 decades before I set out on an entrepreneurial journey. I was associated with a European multinational where I can say I actually grew up along with a startup. And I was blessed with 2 or 3 startup projects, both in India and in Indonesia. And while I was handling those startup projects, I came across a situation where the brand that I was associated with as a corporate brand was a 50-year-old brand. So it was a very powerful brand. And yet, when we had to introduce a new product, we couldn't take branding for granted. We had to go through a very scientific and structured process of product branding before we could actually convince the customers that we are a contender. And then taking up the journey to a level where we could charge a premium pricing for our quality was a far cry. So it took us almost a couple of years to get there. And that was when I learned the power of branding for an organization and how it can drive success and sustainability. So that motivated me to set off on branding as an entrepreneurial service when I decided to call it quits on my corporate career after 2 decades, completed 2 decades and in the same organization, but fortunately on very diverse roles. Started as a finance professional, moved on as a finance controller and company secretary, then on to general manager, and then to managing director for 2 business units in India. Having gone through that journey, I was quite convinced that I could start off on my own as an entrepreneur. Obviously, the initial days were not all sunshine. I used to call myself a struggling entrepreneur for almost a couple of years, partly because I didn't put in enough efforts, I must admit, and also partly because branding is not something that's perceived as a necessity by most startups and SMEs. Correct. They look at it as an option. So the challenge initially was to create that awareness in people on how branding can actually bring about an ROI for them. And we had to work out on very intricate metrics to prove to them that this is our roadmap and this is how you're going to get back your investments. And branding is not a cost, it's an investment. So I had to go through the journey. And today I think I'm in a much better position after 4 years in this space. And during the informal session, you were also asking me about the family support. I think family support was great, but obviously whenever you set out something on your own, I think many people around you will be very skeptical about whether you are on the right track or whether you're taking a risk. It would be better to start off as a corporate career again on a second innings. But I believed in myself and went ahead, and since then there's no looking back.
Great. So it's so some of the key pointers that just took my attention while you were talking was as an entrepreneur, entrepreneurship is something that it's there in your DNA somewhere. It's just that you have to identify it, like you rightly did during your corporate career, and then believed it in yourself, and you bought something onto the market. That yes, branding, I completely agree with you that people do not see branding as a necessity with the SMEs. They always see it as a cost, but got to see it as an investment. I totally agree with it. Fantastic, ma'am. So over to Dr. Rakesh. Sir, if you can just help us understand your journey so far.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my entire career has been with Godrej, straight out of the Management Institute, campus recruitment, straight into Godrej. And I worked with Godrej for close to 4 decades, almost 40 years with Godrej. My first and the last job was with Godrej. And in Godrej, I was lucky to handle several portfolios, several types of functions, something which very few people get an opportunity to do. So operations, projects, these are supply chain, logistics. These are some of the things that a lot of people do. But I was fortunate to even head marketing at an all India level for the company. I had strategies, I did IT. So a lot of diverse functions. So it was a very enriching experience with a company which is now 123 years old. So not a startup, definitely. So after my superannuation, I superannuated in December last year after 39 and a half years with the company. Uh, so I thought whatever little knowledge I have learned during all these years and with all my experience, if I could utilize it to help others succeed in the area of operations and supply chain, where Godrej clearly holds an edge over its competitors in terms of its agility of supply chain, in terms of the resilience of supply chain, in terms of customer service levels, freshness of products. So, if I could help others also succeed by incorporating some of the principles that were behind the success of the supply chain. So, I started on my own consulting firm called Reflexive Supply Chain Solutions, which is focused on improving agility in the supply chain and operations of the company so that we improve the service level and maintain product freshness at unprecedented level, very high levels. So both these achieving simultaneously. There are a lot of techniques which go behind it, but the techniques are not as important as understanding the problems of the customers. What's the mindset which is preventing them? Because there is no rocket science in this. Ultimately, it's all common sense. But how do we cause the change to happen in organization is what I am focused on. Techniques are known to people, techniques can be learned by people. There are several other consultants who can give the techniques, but my focus is how do we make sure that these relevant techniques are applied and these are successful in the organizations where these are applied. So that has been my journey. It's less than a year since I started my firm, and India was hit by the pandemic within a couple of months of my starting the journey. So it has been mostly e-journey in terms of helping the clients. The physical meetings were only in January and February. After that, we have been only e-meeting,
Okay.
and through e-meeting helping the client succeed. So that's my
Okay.
mission.
Okay. So, for the knowledge of our audience, Dr. Rakesh Sinha holds a first doctorate degree in the field of philosophy in supply chain in India. So, correct me if I'm wrong, Doctor. Is the term right that I have used?
Yeah. It's the first PhD in supply chain management in the country. It was way back in '96 when supply chain management
Great.
wasn't so well known. People were just starting on this journey.
Great, great, amazing. Thank you so much, Doctor, for sharing your thoughts. Coming to Mr. Yashwant. Yashwant is like Ekta mentioned that he's the founder of Thick Shake Factory, a product that is cherished by newborns to the oldies. So, Yashwant, if I may request you to please share your journey so far. Hello.
Sir, you are on mute.
Oh, sorry. First of all, thank you for the kind introduction, Shashikala ma'am. And it's an honor to be sitting among the esteemed panelists who are having a lot of experience. I thank I am Vizag for the kind opportunity. So my journey as an entrepreneur started exactly 7 years back. Actually, on December 20th, 2013, I launched my first store. So
Amazing.
exactly 7 years ago. Tomorrow we'll be celebrating a 7 years anniversary.
Very good.
So it's been quite a journey. It's been a roller coaster. I think most of the entrepreneurial journeys, whether they're big or they're small, are roller coaster journeys, and mine has also been quite that way. And so, I mean, actually I'm also like almost everybody who's actually listening to this audience. So I think most of the MBA schools are filled with engineers. So I'm also an engineer by default that comes out of Telugu states. And I worked for a year, and then I did my MBA in from Exam-B. I graduated. I worked for a year in TCS, and then I started up. So I want to begin this session by saying that whoever is sitting right now in the second year, in corporate world, I had only 1 year of experience, just more than you. A lot of you actually might have had 3-4 years of experience also. So when I started up, I did not have that much of experience also. So the notion that you need to have a lot of prior experience is not true for everyone. Like for some people, it may be required. For a lot of people, for some people, it may not be required. So everybody's journey in a startup is very different that way. And so yes, so we started out the whole concept of milkshake retailing. That time there was nobody in the market who actually were selling milkshakes. So we saw an opportunity. We thought we saw an opportunity, and luckily it worked out for us. So definitely, you have to be lucky to have some reasonable amount of success also in life and also in business. That's what I believe. But obviously, the more harder we work, the more luck we create. That's what also I believe in that. So today, not only after creating this category, I mean, we made a lot of people followed in this category. And in South India, we are today the number one market leaders in milkshakes. And in the entire India, we are number two in terms of the market share and number of stores. So today we have about 120 stores. And that was all. That's all pre-COVID. So again, in COVID, we took a very big beating, especially in the month of April and May. That was supposed to be our peak season, where we generally do 150% of our sale, whereas we fell to about 10% of our sale back in April and May, whereas all the expenses remain the same. So it was a very testing moment, and I think it was actually the biggest moment. And luckily, I did realize that 40 to 50% of the restaurants in my field are going to shut down for good. And luckily, I could see that, and I would say that I had we pivoted our model fully. So we are, I mean, even though the market is now back to almost 65-70% of the pre-COVID levels in my sector, we are almost, we have actually completely pivoted our entire business model. We are getting into something called as cloud kitchens, and we're launching a lot of our own brands. We're getting into food. We're tying up with a lot of Bollywood celebrities, and, we're doing a lot of good stuff. So yes, we did use this horrible event, Black Swan event, to use it as an opportunity. As Shashikala ma'am said, that an entrepreneur has to find a good in even the worst. But that is just not due to some resourcefulness or talent, but also it is due to the compulsion, right? So it is a matter of survival, and it is a matter of existence. So so entrepreneurs do find opportunities in the worst events also.
Great. Very well said, Yashwant, about the whole scenario. And so, coming to the next question to all the three panelists is in this 2020, when we first heard that yes, there's going to be a complete lockdown in your businesses. What was the first thought that came to your mind? Because when the lockdown, at least for me, when I heard that yes, there is a complete shutdown in Mumbai where we are based, I assumed that it would be just for few days or so, and we are back in action. But when it got extended and again extended and again extended, what was your thought process in your existing businesses? Now what do we do? Like Yashwant said, he had a bunch of things. When you're dealing with products, services is something different. The scenario was different for the service sector, and for the product sector it was different. If you can just share your thoughts on how you dealt with the current scenario in your own businesses. Were there thoughts that should I start with something new, should I collaborate with somebody? There were millions of thoughts, I'm sure, would have come up. So how did you deal with it, and what were those thoughts, if you can just share them, starting with Dr. Sinha?
So when the pandemic really struck us, and all of us had a lockdown, initially it came as a very big shock. Without meeting people, without being with them to understand what their issues are, how do I help them succeed? Can it be done over phone? Can it be done over a video call? All those thoughts were coming. But after some time, after having a few meetings, it really started growing on me, saying that it is possible, because ultimately it's a question of listening to them, it's a question of understanding their context, it's a question of evolving the solution jointly, it's a question of changing the mindsets or helping them change their own mindsets, and then hand holding them during the solution phase. So all these can be done over a video call. Of course, the only thing we would miss is going to the factory and carrying out really factory level shop floor improvements, which are not possible really on the video call. But if you are talking of setting up a process, a good supply chain process, designing it from scratch, that can be done over a video call. And over the last 9 months, I have found that most of my clients are quite willing to take that journey and be on it for improving their supply chains. And in many cases, it's I would say a bit more efficient than depending only on physical meetings, because now all 7 days of the week are open, timings are flexible, even if it's late evening, which is not really possible if you have to go and meet people in their offices. So Saturday, Sundays are out. Other days it has to be within restricted time. There's a lot of time involved in travel. So all that is saved, and more time can be spent on really value added work. So it's not all that bad. Of course, I do miss meeting people personally, being with them in their own areas. But yeah, it's working out pretty well for me in this consulting domain.
Just to add to my question, we all have our teams, our office teams. So, as an entrepreneur, what was your thought for your team? Because the teams are dependent; their livelihood is dependent on us to a certain extent. So, what was the thought?
So as I said, I started this journey in January.
Correct.
And right from the beginning, I decided that I will have a virtual team.
Okay.
Because in this gig economy, for different types of projects, you would need different expertise for different periods of time.
Okay.
And you can't really have all the good people as your employees. There are several other people who have the expertise,
Correct.
whose expertise can be tapped, but they are not willing to come as your employees. So they also like to be in this gig economy and work on projects which are interesting to them, rather than staying idle for some time. So it was never a challenge that I have a whole set of employees. So for your information, I am the only permanent employee in my company. All others are would be virtual on project basis, as and when needed for certain projects, depending on what expertise is required, for what duration that expertise is required. And we would work as a team to implement a solution. So that wasn't really applicable to me.
Yeah, but that's a smarter way of working too.
Yeah, it's a way of working. Yeah.
Correct, correct. So, Asha ji, so the same question to you, that how did you deal with this scenario? Sorry, just before Asha ji starts, for the participants, in case anybody has questions for the panelist, please do drop in your questions in the chat box with with the panelist name whom you're directing the question to. In case if there is no name, we would assume that it is for all the three panelists. Okay, thank you. Yes, Asha ji.
Thank you. I think there are two parts to your question, Shivkala. Let me start with the first one. In a situation like this, I think navigating the turbulence is anything but easy, because it came as a shocker to every one of us. And to me, I think the most important challenge in these situations is more the mental tuning rather than the physical or the logistical solutions to the problem. And to me, that was not a problem actually, because I think right from day one, the way I looked at it was, yeah, it's a passing phase. It'll be behind us at some point. Maybe it took longer than I imagined in the beginning. I was expecting something like 3 to 6 months, but that wasn't the case. It was longer. But most important is, I just kept telling myself that I have to stay focused on the big picture. Because at the end of the day, if our focus is on the bigger goal, every other challenges that come our way will look very minute, because it's just steps that you need to take and you're prepared for it. So for me, mentally aligning myself to the situation, I would not say was a huge challenge. And like everybody else would have their own coping mechanisms in such situations, I had my own. I kept myself busy organizing talk shows on Zoom, almost 2 every month. So that kept me very busy. And as far as my clients, yes, there were about 6 in the funnel when the COVID happened. There are about maybe 2 or 3 of them had to slip away, but hopefully they'll come back soon. But the other 3 sustained, and fortunately they were the big ones. And so honestly, I really didn't allow that to deter my spirits at all because of the clients that I was blessed with, 1, and 2, also because I align my mind to think that this too shall pass. So to me, that's the way I handled it. And as far as logistics about the team was concerned, like Dr. Rakesh Sinha was mentioning, I also operate from a plug and play office as a startup. Okay. I have a virtual team. The only thing that I did miss was meeting up with my clients, but my clients were kind enough to support me online, and I have always been used to working online for a long time. So really, I think I didn't really look at it very negatively, and even today I haven't allowed that to cause me a great deal of anxiety or stress at all. I just keep doing my job, and I have the belief that things will get back to normal of sorts in a few months. And I think the most important thing is to stay busy and manage your relationships well.
Great. So Yashwant, thank you, ma'am. So Yashwant, a quick question to you that in such long pandemics, how do companies sustain without functioning? Now, when you had in your business, what was the exercises that you and your team did to sustain this 9 to 10 months of complete shutdown?
So first of all, I don't think neither me nor any one of us in the world back in March thought that this will continue for 10 months or 2 years or whatever.
Correct.
So people were initially hoping that it. In fact, I had landed in India I had gone to Europe from March 4th to March 11th. So I had come back on 11th. And from 12th or 13th, the lockdown had started, like just one day before I had landed, in fact. Okay. Or else I would have been stuck in Europe. So people were actually thinking that this will last for like 15 days, and then 1 week, and then it was getting extended. And initially, all of us, as you remember, people were thinking that it's just going to be some vacation, 1 week, 10 days. Okay. Then it was extending and extending. So what I did was, first of all, there was no playbook. I mean, none of us had a playbook for this. So, I mean, what do you do, right? So there is no organized thing that you can actually look up or refer to, because you don't know. It's like totally uncertain.
Absolutely.
So what I mean, to the best of my abilities, what I could do was I was Googling a lot. So I was actually searching very closely on what was happening in Wuhan, because back in February and March, Wuhan was one of the worst affected places, right? So I was closely following what was happening there. And I also looked up what was happening during the past recessions back in 1919, 1920, in the financial recessions, not the pandemic recessions. So, so there was 2 things, right? So one which I got wrong, I thought I'll definitely get it right. I mean, I wanted to share some of my mistakes also, because generally people just think that, if you're having something, everything, whatever you do will be a success. It's not really like that. You keep on trying 100 things and one of them will work out. People will only know the one thing that actually works out. So when I was actually going through 1919 recession, 1929 recession and all, I found a very interesting statistic. During recession, all the sectors are down, but ice cream sales were up by 20%, 15 or 20%. because ice cream is something that is quickly eatable and it is cheap. I mean, the people cannot afford a vacation during a recession because people are, at loss of jobs and people are scared to spend more money. But people can spend lesser money so that they get more happiness. So I thought that my business is recession proof, and we'll do a lot more business. So that's what I thought. That was a mistake. And what actually happened in Wuhan also was that food delivery was doing very well actually. So even at the peak of the pandemic, the food delivery was actually doing pretty well in Wuhan, and but that is China. So I thought that our business may not get affected too much, honestly, back in March or March, and but I was totally wrong, right? So so obviously India is India, so you really cannot adapt some American or Chinese playbook to India and assume Indian consumers actually think like Americans or Chinese. So that's totally wrong. But coming back specifically to your question, so we did not really know what to do, and so I mean, but it was a no-brainer that safety and hygiene is going to rule the game. So back, I think even in March 20, as early as March 20th or March 25th itself, we came up with temperature stickers and everything. Like now it's like the norm. Like nobody even is thinking that's novel. But even like as recently as March 20th, we were actually one of the first in F&B market, because I got the idea from Wuhan. I mean, it was not my brainwave or something. I just checked out in Wuhan. So people were going out with the temperature stickers and the hygiene and everything. So we made sure that first of all, for me, the as a business owner, the prime concern was I should make sure that none of my employees are getting affected by COVID, right? So because if any one of the employees get affected by COVID, it was a stigma, right? Today it's not no longer, but I'm talking about March. It was actually a stigma. So press was running news that XYZ brand employees are getting affected by COVID. So that can actually make or that can actually break any brand in that moment. So we were very extremely careful. So so we made sure that we had all the temperature and all those things, and we were taking it very seriously. One, for the humanitarian reasons and also for the business reasons. I mean, first the business has to be there, and then you can talk about loss or profit or so that was our primary focus. And then we also addressed the fact that we communicated what we were doing to our consumers. So we ran some campaigns on social media and everything, showing what we were actually doing, like people wearing masks, and we said, anyways, nobody were going. So we had all CCTV camera footages and everything. So our online sales were kind of okay. And initially they were very bad, but slowly, because of that enforcement over a period of few months, because people, like I would say probably in June, July, people were like kind of starting to order out and, starting to get a little more relaxed compared to March, because that time people were in a state of panic. So slowly in June and July, people were actually kind of getting adjusted to this new norm. So because we were completely enforcing the message, what we were doing in terms of hygiene and safety, people, more and more people started coming out. So I mean, coming out as in ordering in, not really coming to the outlets, but ordering in. So I would say that today, I mean, actually, when we started back in 7 years back, there was nobody selling thick shakes and milkshakes. After that, hundreds of players came. Like there are 2 to 3 players in the national level, as Keventas and Frozen Bottle, 3 players are there. But everyone else is like localized or a lot of standalone 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3 shops. So all of these people are out now in the market, and in that sense, it's actually the survival of the fittest, right? So whoever is actually the best, they only survive through these times. And all these smaller brands are gone, and our brand has been found to be very resilient, in the sense that our per store sales are highest across the country, across all the milkshake brands. And we could reopen 83% of our entire stores. 17% are still shut down, compared to, I would say, Keventas has managed to open only 38% of its overall stores. Frozen Bottle has opened about 65% of its overall stores. And there's another brand called Makers of Milkshakes. That brand is completely gone. So my point was, we believed that we can we stuck to the basics, that what we were doing, we didn't care about business, in the sense that we believed our business dependent on the consumer's confidence. That's a brand, right? So what is a brand? It's nothing but a trust. So we wanted to make sure that consumers continue to trust us, and we hoped and believed that we will get business at some point of time. Luckily, we could sustain the expenses until then. But yes, I would say that now we are kind of, I wouldn't be presumptuous enough to say we are completely out of it, but we are kind of back to like 70% of our pre-COVID level sales, and we're doing a lot more stuff. So I think it's been an extremely fantastic learning experience for us. And we took consumer feedback very, very seriously. Like, I'm a consumer myself. So I was asking every day myself, would I order somewhere? Would I go somewhere? And if I have to even consider ordering somewhere, what would I require to do? So that's where we were coming from. Our entire team was looking and acting like consumers, and that's how our journey has been.
Great. Thank you so much. And I could actually relate to each and everything that Yashwant was saying, because just before the pandemic started off and the lockdown started off, we started off with a new office, and I faced the same scenario. How we could cope it up was again asking myself the same question, what I would do as a consumer and kind of thing. So I completely agree, or with your pointers. So we've got questions coming up from our participants. So the first question that comes to all three panelists is, they say that people get a lot of ideas for startups or business models and stuff. So, but there is a level of uncertainty with the level of experience that the youngsters are carrying. So how do you select the idea, what you want to implement, and how do do it? Apart from the expert, the person who's an expert from the domain, for youngsters, what is your suggestion? Asha ji, we could start with you.
Sure. I think the most important question for a budding entrepreneur to ask himself is what am I? Why am I doing what I'm doing? I think that's the most important question they should ask. How they come up with the options, I think the environment can actually help them decide what they should do. So just looking around, they'll find some gap or some pain point that they can keep exploring if they really want to be an entrepreneur. And for sure, they will discover that there is some opportunity that they can actually solve. And once they come up with that idea, I think the second question they have to ask themselves is, do they have the hunger or the passion to go through it? Because it's not going to be an easy road ahead, right? Entrepreneurship has never been easy for anyone. As Yashwant was rightly mentioning, people only see the good things that happen after a lot of struggle. So I think the preparedness for the struggles ahead is key for them. And three, having picked an idea or a solution to a problem, I think the important thing that they need to do is to validate it. How are they going to validate it? They will know. I think first question they will ask is, why am I doing it? What am I doing it? What am I doing? Why am I doing? How am I doing it? And for whom am I doing it? So I think the question that they have to ask their target customers is, will this add value to you? I think that's the most important thing. So I think today there are a lot of avenues for them to do this kind of a hypothesis testing. They can do it through Google Forms. They can do it with face-to-face interviews. They can do it with word of mouth, circulating the forms through known people. But I think the most important thing is they have to reach out to the right people who are the potential users, and then they can validate if what they have in mind is going to be valued by a customer. Because they may have a great idea, but if nobody wants it, it doesn't help them, right? So it could be a moderate idea, but many people may want it. So it works both ways. So I think the important thing is for them to validate their business idea with the prospective customers. And then, of course, there are many things that they need to do to take that forward. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. Rakesh ji?
Yeah, so I will keep it very short. It's really whatever you are passionate about, you should plunge into that. Because if you're not passionate about something, and if you want to make a business out of it, there will be a lot of efforts involved and you will get tired. But if you are passionate about something, it becomes almost like a hobby. So you would like to spend more time knowing about it, reading about it, learning about it, everything that you would do for a hobby. And the more time you spend on your passion, it doesn't really tire you. You feel more joyful, more fresh, the more time you spend on that passion. So if you find a passion which really excites you, then look for a way to convert that passion into a business. And if you are able to convert that passion into a business, then you would be successful. Uh, if you get into a business or start a business that you are not really passionate about, but you want to do it because some 5, 10 people want that type of a product, but you are not really passionate, I don't think you would succeed. So unless your startup idea matches with your passion, it would require a lot of effort, lot of time, and it may not succeed. So that would be my suggestion to the budding entrepreneurs. And all of us know what our passions are.
Correct. Thank you, Dr. Rakesh. Thank you. So, Yashwant, after your, I think you started your career with uh, a technology platform, developing a technology platform for travelers, and then coming on to the food sector. So, how does that, how did that change come in? And then moving on to, in continuation to the question asked to the panelist, how do you choose a business?
So, ma'am, basically, my after I started, I mean, this is actually, I'm glad you asked this question. This is something very few people are aware of. So the thing is, when I started up the company, right? So I actually started up two companies at the same time because after my, when I was starting the job, after I started the job, I believed a lot more in the idea of the company that failed, which is no longer in existence. It's called Citron Mobility. So
Okay.
I'm talking about back in 2012. That time it was the era of 2G. There was no 3G also. People were having 3.5 inches phones. I was working in TCS and Nokia was my client. So I happened to be in a room where Nokia's MD, the current PepsiCo MD, is Mr. Radhi Kumar sir. He mentioned that in the next 10 years, or in the next 5 years, actually, the phone's sizes will increase from 2.5 or 3 inches to 6 inches. It will become the norm. So I believed it, and it was a very big moment for me. Um, I mean, I understood that people will be viewing big tablets and big phones in the in the near future. So this is what it is. I mean, my phone today is like 7 inch, whatever, it's like big. So this was a novelty back then, and the people. So, and I was traveling on a bus in from Chennai to Hyderabad, and I was forced to listen to a Tamil movie when I didn't understand what was happening. And obviously, it was a pirated movie also. So I actually got the idea that why don't I take content, put it on phones, and rent out the phones or tablets to people in the buses, right? Because when we go even to India, to Dubai, or any nearby place, also Malaysia, also you actually have in-flight entertainment. But 99% of the Indians don't travel by flight. I mean, that's the fact that probably none of the people in this room may not be knowing. I mean, you all are from IIMs. You should understand that you're among the top 0.1 or 0.5% of the people, and you may be thinking that you're happy or unhappy. But you should actually understand the country we are living in. 98, 99% of the people don't even travel by flight. They cannot afford to travel by flight. Only 2% of our country are able to pay taxes in the first place. So the point was, I thought that this was a great business idea to put content into the tablets and rent it out to people. So I could actually, I could actually raise funds for that idea because I believed that could become very big. And I did not have a technical co-founder, so I got some guy. That guy cheated me. He was working in Triple IT, and then he went to Berkeley. He got selected in Berkeley School of Arts Business, and he left taking the entire code. So I put in a lot of my time. And Thick Shake Factory was something that I was sure it will work in terms of cash and carry, because I did a lot of research in Europe when I was in my student exchange program. I clearly understood there's a market for milkshakes, and people will, for sure buy it. But obviously, it was very. I mean, it's one thing to think of it in idea, but it's another thing to actually start it up and do it. So when we were about to start, even I was very scared whether it will work or not. But luckily, it did work because I took a risk and I made sure that I was paying a very high rental for the space I got. because it was the best space in the food court. Like there's a mall in Hyderabad called Manjira Mall. Back then, it was the only mall in this part of the city in Kukatpalli. So there people, I mean, it didn't do as well as people thought it would, but it was supposed to be doing very well. So I paid a lot of premium for my first store to make sure that I was bang in front of the escalator, and because location is extremely important retail business. So we were making money from day one. We did almost a sale of 20,000 on day one. Whereas I thought that on a first month basis, we'll be doing about 3 lakhs. We did around 4 lakhs of business by the end of first month. Slowly we started picking it up. So for one store, a whole year I ran the whole store, and then, but my thing is the Citron Mobility failed. Even though it was a fantastic idea, I didn't have a team, number one. I didn't have a technical co-founder, and I failed. And I was probably also too early of its time. Like today, maybe about 3 years back, if I had started this, it could have become a very big company probably. But that time it was too early of its time. So I just want to share that number one, idea is not everything. I mean, idea actually doesn't mean anything. Let me put it this way. I mean, just imagine for a moment that there are 6 billion people on the planet, and every time everyone is thinking about something. So at least 3 billion people are thinking, because 3 billion are sleeping. So just imagine that every second, 3 billion ideas are floating around, at least 3 billion every second. Imagine how many ideas are floating around in a year or in a day or in a minute. So if you think that your idea is like the most brilliant idea, you're a fool. I mean, but a lot of people do think, but can you execute it or not? That's what it takes. So even if you take a very, very simple idea, if you're able to do it, it's great. Because I see a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs coming to me and saying that, Yashwant, I had this idea of Swiggy 5 years back, 3 years back only I had the idea of Google or Facebook or TikTok or whatever, but I couldn't do it. If I had left my job, I'd have done it. No, boss. I mean, you're just fooling yourself. If you really think that's so revolutionary, you should do it. That's what I mean. And I also want to give an advice to budding entrepreneurs today that, like for example, like today, right now we have Dr. Rakesh sir. So if you see during Rakesh sir's time, India was much, much less underdeveloped. It was developing, right? Today we are way more developed. We all have a lot of opportunities. So about 40 years back, people did not have too many choices. Like to get a job itself was a big deal. Today, getting a job is not a big deal. Anybody can find a job somewhere. So what do you have to lose, right? So I think people should take risk, especially from premier colleges like IIMs and IITs. If people are not taking the risk, I think it's foolish, because the reward in entrepreneurship is extremely high if you do well. If you don't do well, you'll get a job any which way. So I don't understand where is the risk. And I think it's a very good risk to take.
Great. Interesting. So we have another question for Rakesh sir. I'll just read out the question to you, sir. Consultants are required to quickly understand the problems at the root level and build customized solutions. It becomes important to have some standardization to bring in efficiency and quick turnarounds. How do you ensure quality and efficiency while tapping it into the big gig economy, since every person has a different way of working?
Yeah, it's a good question. It has a lot of nuances. So let's talk about it a little bit. So when we talk of standardization, if you are looking for a solution in an area from a consultant, would you like the consultant to give you a standardized solution, or really customize it for your context? Because no two contexts are similar. Everybody's problem is unique. So standardization doesn't really work. Even if the solution is implemented, it's not sustainable over a period of time. But a solution which is meant for that particular company at that point in time, in their context, if that's done well, it will be sustainable. So I won't advise you to go for standardized solutions. So, for example, if you say that I can offer DDMRP implementation, demand-driven material requirements planning implementation, that's a standardized solution. It's different from saying, I would work with you to improve your customer service levels. That's a better problem to solve. And whether DDMRP may be a solution for that, or you would need some amount of customization, some amount of process changes, some amount of mindset changes. So that's really, if you're focused on the customer problem, standardization is not so important. It does help at times, but many a times it takes you away from the direction of solution which you should be doing. Similarly, between efficiency and effectiveness, would you like to have an effective solution that is sustained and run by the employees of the company for a long time? or you want an efficient solution which works on day one, but then people don't believe in it and it dies down. We have seen a lot of ERP implementation, BDMR, PTOC implementations, which haven't sustained. So would you like to offer that type of a solution, or offer a solution which is really tailor-made for the client and that is sustained on its own with a internally built process of ongoing improvement, so that the client themselves can keep improving on that solution for a long time? So it's a question of philosophy. So if you are really passionate about solving the client's problems, you should do whatever is best for that client at that point in time in that context. And if you are using some other people from the virtual gig economy, they need to share the same mindset. That's important. The technicalities are known to many people, but if they share the same customer-oriented mindset, then your solution would be good. Then I don't have to do much of coordination. Does that answer your question, Mihir?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
So the next question is for Asha ma'am. I'll just read it out. What is your point of view on how various industries will grow after the pandemic will grow weaker in the future? Will the growth rate of various industries be stagnant as they are currently, or will it be even higher than the times when everything was before the pandemic? And how will this growth rate affect the job environment out there?
Interesting questions there, actually multiple questions again. Let me start it this way. If I were to pick 3 sectors that I think will be doing very well post the pandemic, but I still don't know when is post the pandemic, because by the time the whole world gets the vaccine, I think it could be well over a year. So I think we are nowhere near post pandemic as yet. But let's talk about the next few months, as they rightly mentioned, when pandemic starts to soften a little bit. Hopefully no second wave. I think there are 3 sectors that will be doing superb. One is the edutech space. We are already seeing that a lot of investments have been going to the edutech space. Most of the more than $100 million investments have gone into companies like the Byju's and the Unacademy. So I think the edutech space is going to prosper significantly. The second one that's doing very well already is the entertainment and gaming space, and I think that will continue to thrive even post the pandemic, because not many people would feel comfortable going back to theaters for a long time now. I would think they would feel very skeptical. And the third sector that I think will do very well is the technology space. And when I talk of technology, it's more to do with like the cloud computing, companies like the Zoom and similar platforms, and home appliances, technological appliances, because I think work from home is something that has evolved to stay. Maybe not to the extent that we are doing today, but I think 60-40 percentage of work from home and work physical environment will be the new order going forward. So the home appliances companies will still have a huge market to serve in the coming months. So those 3 sectors I think would do well. The 3 sectors that would be suffering for a while, for a good time, will be probably the airlines, and they will have to come out with very innovative solutions to rebuild their customer base. It's not going to be easy. Real estate, of course, is going to be a huge challenge because this pandemic has actually set people think, do we need all those posh offices anymore? Or can we actually save costs and invest that in more value-added projects? So that's something that's going to take a big hit. So innovative ways of, again, subscription models maybe, or temporary office models may have to be evolved going forward. And the third one is the auto sector, which I think is already not doing great over the last couple of years. And this has not made it any easy for the auto industry to recover. So passenger cars may be doing a bit well, but all the other luxury cars are going to take a big hit because of a lot of job losses that has happened over the last few months. So that's the first part of the question. And I think the second part of the question was, how is it going to affect the job market? Am I right?
Correct.
Right. I think the ones that are doing well will continue to employ more and more people. But the only difference is going to be that the gig economy is going to play a significant role in the workforce going forward. The paradox is that senior level management jobs are quite a few, even in spite of the pandemic. The lower level jobs are also quite a bit, but the middle management jobs are the ones that are taking a back seat for now. And they are the ones who will probably be evolving into the gig economy, but they will be playing a huge role going forward by upskilling and cross-skilling themselves. So that's the dynamics in terms of the job market that I would see going forward.
Great. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Another question to all the three panelists is, when starting, how would we get to know about our first customer? Should we try to find someone who might be a loyal customer and give a long-term business, or just any customer to experiment upon? So you can start, Asha ma'am, you could start with it.
Sure. I think, yeah, the first customers are the most valuable customers, because they will be the brand ambassadors for us going forward. So I think the first customers have to be the right customers, because if we are not selling it to the right customers, they won't see value in it. So the most important thing is to sell it to somebody who has a need for it, point number one, and two, who can see the value in our product. And once they see the value in the product, the word of mouth will do the marketing for us, and we don't have to do it anymore. I will give you a very quick example of how, when we had to introduce a new product into the market, how I and my team approached our first customer. It took a long time for us to convince one customer that there is value in our product. But once he was convinced, it took us a long time, almost 3 to 4 months, because ours was an industrial product. So we had to go through trial runs, bulk runs, everything before we could actually sell the product to him. But once we did that, that customer actually went around telling other customers in his locality and in his sector that these guys have come out with an amazing product, and I think you should try it. So if you are successful with your first customer, then the customer will do the marketing for you.
Great. Rakesh sir?
Yeah, the first customers are very important, definitely, because they not only spread the word of mouth, but also help you evolve your offering. Because whatever preparation you do, we are never sure whether your offering is right, it's perfect, or it will need some amount of mid-course correction. So first customers would help you in that journey to make your offering, I would say, more perfect for that type of solution. So the way I would look at the first customer is a person who has the right mindset and he's passionate about solving the problem. If I talk to a customer and he says all my competitors have deployed SAP and DDMRP, so I also want to do that, then that's not the right mindset. It's not a business problem. It's just to show off to the world that I have these solutions. But if a customer says that some of my orders are getting delayed and I'm not able to fulfill 10% of the customer's requirements because I have frequent stockouts and I don't know how to manage it, then that's a good problem to solve. And the customer is passionate. He knows what the real problem is. It's a consumer level problem. It's not an internal problem. So that's a good problem to solve. And these customers would have what is popularly called as a 100 by 0 mindset, taking 100% responsibility for their actions and results and 0 excuses. So if you hit upon such a customer with the right mindset, I think you're lucky. but it's difficult to find such a customer as your first customer. In that case, if the mindset is reasonably good, you could work on it. And apart from developing your offering and implementing the solution, you could also work on changing the mindset of the customer so that he really looks at the real problem and not the perceived problem. So, and if you are able to do that in your first customer, then you would be successful. And the learnings from there can be really taken to all other clients.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. Next question is for Yashwant. The question is, sometimes it may so happen that we may get clients with high hopes in the early stage of starting the venture, but our venture may not have scaled up to that much. How to deal with such situations?
That's a good question. See, I don't have, mine is a B2C business, so I don't have clients, I only have consumers. However, I'm taking it in the sense that after a certain time, if you are not able to get your customers or if you're not able to do business, then how do we scale, right? So number one, we need to, even before we start up, we need to do a lot of research before we understand the sector in which we are getting into, whether the market is there or not in the first place. Number two, it's important not to have sentiment in business, in the sense that just because you have started something, even if it is not working, if you continue to do the same thing, it's like a sunk cost, right? So whatever you have studied in your economics, if you're plowing back your effort into something that is sinking, no, you should not do it. But I'm saying that you should be smart enough to identify which is the sunk cost versus if you put effort, which will actually get you back. So if you really think that there's a lot of scope, but some customers are leaving you or your business is not doing well, then see, it's just a problem, right? Like right now, when you are studying in IIM, you will be given on a piece of paper that, a business is given this, a business is a loss, is it as a profit? But in real life, nobody writes it down for you. You just have to think those problems in your head. And most of the time, it's about identifying the problem. Most of the time, we don't know what is the problem in our life. We just have to identify it. So if you actually think that you're a student and if you think that there's a problem in your head and you actually look at it from a problem solving part of it, I'm sure that we'll find a solution. But many times it does happen that even if we put our entire effort, the solution is not coming. Then we should identify alternatives or we should just move on. There's nothing wrong in stopping what we are doing and pivoting, right? So, most of the successful businesses are all pivoting. They keep changing constantly. If I have to talk about my business, we initially started off our own store. Then we never wanted to franchise it. Then we were getting a lot of franchising inquiries. We never franchised. Then we franchised. Then we stopped. Then it's always a constant pilot. So today we are piloting like anything. So we are actually, as I was telling you, we're getting into fully online business. We're getting into food. So the thing is, it's not that we are doing the same business again and again. If something is not working, you stop it and do something else which is working. That's my suggestion to what I could understand.
So Ashaji, if you could add to this.
Sure. Since I've been into the B2B business, I can share some experience here. I think, especially in the B2B, I think it's very important to position ourselves correctly in the beginning, to make sure that we don't over-engineer ourselves or under-engineer. So positioning becomes a very important factor in a B2B business. Which is the target customer that we are going to address. Because if we are not clear about it, we will end up going to the wrong customers or trying to get orders or trying to cope with customers who are not our target. And then we lose our credibility and the trust factor very quickly, even before we start building it. So I think it's important to position ourselves and define the target audience very clearly in the beginning. And two, when we go to a customer, I think it's also important to manage the expectations correctly. Because if you don't set the expectations right, then you're leaving it to confusion and doubt. And then obviously it damages our credibility very quickly. So setting the expectations right in the beginning will help in setting out a very articulate engagement with the customer. And then there are two things. One, if the customer expects something that's not within our scope, there are two options for us. One, evaluate whether it's something that we can deliver to them, probably with a predefined time frame and a predefined cost. And if we cannot, I think very clearly we have to tell them, no, this is not our space. This is what we can do. And probably if that's a potential customer that we would want to nurture the relationship, we can refer somebody else who is in that space to them to take care of it. Or we could even get into a collaboration with somebody with a full level of transparency and service the customer in order to maintain the relationship. But keeping the customer guessing or saying yes to something that we cannot deliver, I think is a very bad starting point.
Great. Very useful insights there.
Thank you.
The next question again is to Yashwant. How the new normal will impact consumer products, food companies, including sourcing strategies, distribution networks, and commodity pricing? Are there any alternative channels? And how do you manage to sustain ongoing relationships with key suppliers and customers?
Okay, so how the new normal will impact consumer products, food companies. So I'm understanding it to be like FMCG companies, the fast moving consumer industries. So actually FMCG sector is doing pretty well in the sense because people are all going to grocery, they're ordering everything online from the groceries. FMCG sector in general is doing very well. The packaged food sector is doing way better than previous levels. If you see any of the biscuit sales or ITC or Britannia, you'll understand that people are doing much better than pre-pandemic levels. Food service is not doing well. It will take a little more time. Retail, food service, entertainment will take a little more time, as Asha ma'am was also saying. With respect to consumer distribution networks and commodity pricing, I think there is a lot of disruption that is going to be caused. I mean, Reliance has entered the FMCG sector, the e-commerce. So Reliance is basically what Reliance is trying to do, in my opinion, is like today 93% of entire commerce is offline. Only 6-7% is e-commerce for all the hype around it. So Reliance is going to want to take 60 to 70% market share of the commerce of 93%. That is why Facebook and everybody is investing billions and billions of dollars. So they're going to change the game in the sense that they're going to control the entire value chain. They're going to have entire data basically with all the geophones and the entire, they're going to come up, they're going to give all the almost ERP like systems to all the Kirana stores. So in the digitalization space of FMCG sector, there is a billions of dollars opportunities that's going to be made. So if you also see companies like Udaan, people are saying that Udaan kind of companies can be the next Alibaba. Flipkart will never be the Alibaba. So Udaan like companies are going to be built mostly in the FMCG space. So this is called as internetization or the digitalization of a sector, right? So that's where a lot of opportunity is there. And coming to the last part of the question where you're saying, how do you manage to sustain ongoing relationship with key suppliers and customers? So it's mainly about payments. So the simple and easiest part of sustaining any relation with supplier is you pay on time. So that at least when you have money, you have to pay them on time or before time. So that if you don't have the flexibility to pay them, at least that time they support you. A lot of companies, especially the larger ones, they don't treat the suppliers well even when they can afford to do so. So that will definitely affect them in the longer run. So my advice is, what at least I have tried to follow in my business is that I try to pay people before the time itself. And mostly I try to avoid taking credit unless it is really required. So I think in a B2B supplier relationship, that is good in the sense, at least for supplying commodities. Because your name in the market is very important. If you have the name, then you can do anything. So the name is very important. And with respect to the internetization, I just wanted to add that because it's concerning my sector and business. So there's a lot of actually what we are actually doing right now is that internetization of a lot of sectors is happening. Like education, the largest companies today are Byju's and White Hat or whatever, all these companies. What are they doing? So essentially, like 10 years back, people used to have maths tuitions and coaching centers. That entire thing is converted to online in the form of Byju's and whatever. The new forms are coming like White Hat. Like coding is not even required, but people are saying that it is required. So and education is being converted to EdTech essentially. And today, if you see, a lot of premier institutes are also starting to offer courses online to build up their own revenue streams, including Harvard and Stanford. I'm sure IIMs also will follow soon. The thing is, this has happened everywhere. Like in transportation sector, Uber, Ola, these guys are rolling. In commerce, Flipkart, and these guys are rolling. So now Jio has come in. Except in food, actually. So in food sector, the biggest chains in India are still the Domino's of the world, the KFCs and the Burger Kings, and these guys are the biggest food companies in India. Whereas I predict, I mean, our company has taken a position that in the next 3 years alone, next 36 months, we believe that India's biggest food companies will not be offline chains, but they'll be internet first chains. So that is what we are actually doing. So we are creating a lot of brands online first, and then we will have some stores also physically, but we will be primarily online. So we believe that in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be able to build India's biggest food and beverages brands without having physical stores. That is what I think the opportunity is there in every sector. Wherever you see offline, conversion of that into online is the next big thing.
Right. So, to all the panelists, it is very important to follow your vision to get success. How far do you think that you've achieved as per your vision? Starting with Dr. Sinha.
Yeah. I would say vision should propel you to do the right things, and it's not in my opinion, a milestone or an end goal. You can keep working on that vision and get better and better. For example, if you are helping companies succeed and design their supply chains in a better way so that they can service the consumers better, there is no end state in sight. You can keep on working on that journey. You can keep on improving. You can achieve more and more things. So vision should be a perpetual thing, which helps you take your business forward and helps you accelerate your business. It's not an end state that I should reach this much of turnover in this. That becomes a goal. It's not a vision. Vision is what you have set out to do, and it can keep you going on and on forever. So I won't say I've achieved 70% of my vision, because nothing like 70%, nothing like 100%. If I am doing better than before and helping more and more people, I think I am on the journey to my vision. And I know that I'll never achieve it, because it's an ongoing journey.
Absolutely. Totally agree with that. Asha ma'am, you're on mute.
I completely second what Dr. Rakesh Sinha said. It's a journey. But what I would like to add is, I think every one of us need to discover our passion. I think that's a process. And once we discover the process, once we discover the passion, I think it's important also to visualize where we want to be. And having visualized where we want to be, the next third step, according to me, is to sow the seed today. Because what we would like to be 5 years from now is not something that we can think in the 4th year. We have to think about it now. So think ahead about what kind of, whether it's a personal goal or a professional goal. I think what kind of person we would like to be, or what kind of job we would like to be doing, it's a call that we need to take today, and then start working towards that. Then we attract the right, because it's kind of implanted in our mind, we start attracting the right kind of resources and network that will help us to get there. And as they say, universe will conspire once you decide.
Great. Yashwant, your thoughts?
There is a 1987 movie called The Wall Street. So there is a character called Gordon Gekko in that. If somebody has seen the movie, he says greed is good, right? So without having a greed or a motivation, I don't think people will be able to do whatever they do, whether it's in a job or it's an entrepreneurship or whatever they do in life. Like for all the students who are listening here, maybe like when you were in school, you would have been told that, you study for your 10th board exams, your life will be set. Is your life set after 10th? No, right? So after you finish your, when you got into your MBA, engineering or graduation university, people would have told you that once you finish your life is set. Now you have got into IIM, and then people are saying that once you get placed, life will be set. You're thinking that right now. But even after you get placed or whether you start your own company, life will never be set. So it's basically a journey that life is always about having a journey constantly. and it's never about the destination, as people say. So I don't think there is a vision. So because we think that there is a vision, and the vision keeps evolving essentially. So when I started my company, I wanted to just open 1 store or 3 stores. Then I said, hey, I want to open 10 stores. Then I said, I want to open 100. Then I'm saying I want to open a lot more. I want to do a lot more. So, as you keep growing, your greed keeps increasing. So today you may earn 100 rupees. Tomorrow you want to earn 1,000 rupees. Even when you earn 1,000, it keeps increasing. So irrespective of the vision, whether we are happy or not is the question. So I think if you are able to separate our vision with respect to our happiness, then life will be sorted out in general, is what I feel.
Great. So, to all the three panelists, what are the key activities that you recommend for upcoming entrepreneurs to invest their time in? And what are the skill sets that they need to invest on when they join an organization? To all the three panelists, starting with Asha ma'am.
Yeah, I think the answers are different, slightly different. If you want to be an entrepreneur and if you want to be joining an organization, because most of them are common, but there will be some exclusive skill sets needed. For an entrepreneur, I would say, I think creative thinking is a very important skill set. Because I think an entrepreneur has to keep questioning continually on whatever assumptions he goes by, whether it's evidenced by data, whether the data is coming from a reliable source, and if it's relevant for the problem, is that actually going to help in the solutions? So creative thinking ability and cognitive skills are something that are very crucial for an entrepreneur. And two, I think that's important also in an organization, because in an organization, you would want to be an entrepreneur, not just an employee, if you really want to grow. So I think the cognitive skills are crucial also when you have to go for an organization. And secondly, I think today, because of automation, a lot of the human jobs are going to be replicated by the machines. It doesn't mean that the job losses are going to increase. I'm not referring to that. But because a lot of the mundane activities are going to be taken up by machines, what will set apart candidates one from the other are the human skills, like the social skills, how you deal with people, how you manage people, how you communicate with people, and the emotional skills like empathy, great resilience, and how you can, to what extent you are good at conflict management, stress management. All of these are going to be very crucial going forward, whether you are an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur or an employee. Because that's what is going to set you apart from your domain experience, because there could be many people coming with domain experience, but these are the factors that will set them apart. So I think these two are very important, but also when we, if any of these budding management professionals choose to make a career in the corporate world, the one thing that they have to keep in mind, or two things that they have to keep in mind is, one is culture, fitting into the culture, right? So it's not easy because the environment is completely different from an academic environment to an industry environment. Of course, there are a lot of industry academia projects that happen these days in institutions, like the one we are doing, where people get to know from a theoretical perspective what kind of environment will be there in the industry when they move on. But the reality there is the true test. So I think having a mindset of openness and adaptability and a learner's approach will help them fit into the organization much better, one. And two, I think they also need to keep in mind, because some of the experiences that I have noticed when I mentor students is that they find it difficult to cope with the organization culture very quickly and take a call to move on. And I think that's not advisable, because at some point you have to be more granular in your approach rather than superficial, because the foundation is key for a long-term sustenance and survival and growth. So initially, even though it may seem hard, I think sticking on and trying to get granular in your career building in the initial years will help you go a long way going forward. And then pivoting to different organizations, different opportunities can be more frequent. But initially, I think a 2 to 3 year stretch will be a great foundation for the budding corporate professionals.
Great. Thank you. Rakesh sir?
Yeah, so I fully agree with whatever Asha ma'am said, and the most important are the emotional intelligence items like empathy, listening, humility. These are the most important, and respect for people, because we must realize that everyone who is working around you in an organization, or if you start on an entrepreneurship journey, then everyone you meet with, those people are good, they have good intentions. The processes may not be efficient or effective, but it's not because of the people who are running them. It's typically the problem lies with our with the mindset of the organization, with the way things have always been done. So our job is really to see what is limiting the organization from achieving higher level of performance, and the answers can be very, very surprising at times. But our thinking ability, our ability to really analyze it, go to the root cause of the problem, and solve at that level is what really counts, and not making some superficial changes based on because when we come out of the institutes, and I can very well relate with you, although it has been a long time back, that we think that we are experts, we know everything, and people there in the organization, they are not experts, so I can go and tell them and help them with my expertise, and things will be better from next year onwards. No, I know that you all are experts, but there's a way of making a change or causing the change to happen in an organization, and we should be cognizant of that. It's not that I'm an expert, I'll tell you that you do this thing and everyone will start doing it and things will change. No, there's a way to cause that change, and we should be aware of doing it the right way.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. Yashwant, quickly. You're on mute.
Yeah, so I fully agree with both the luminaries with a lot of experience who have said. I 100% am in agreement with them. So with respect to people who are choosing a career path for working in an organization, I want to advise that you should have entrepreneurial mindset. Even though you're working in an organization, you should have an entrepreneurial mindset. What does it exactly mean is that you take ownership, right? So whatever job you're given, you take ownership that you need to fulfill it and you need to complete it, even though nobody is monitoring you, right? So no, like in college, nobody will tell you that if you don't attend into this, you will be fined, right? That is the difference between a college and an organization. If you don't come in a blazer for this talk, there will be a fine, or you will not be allowed to sit for placement. That will not be there in the company. So when you have that freedom, you go back, right? So the people who become leaders, who become the heads of large organizations, and I'm sure Rakesh sir will hopefully agree with me, is people who take ownership, and they are probably only 1 or 2% of the people among the 100 people. 100% of the people may have fantastic brains, but only 2% of the people will have that entrepreneurial attitude in an organization, that they take responsibility and execute it. Those will become the leaders and the CMOs and the CXOs or CEOs after 20 years or 30 years, right? That's how it happens. And for people who want to become entrepreneurs, I would say this is the best time in the last 300 years of Indian history, that if you wanted to become an entrepreneur, this is the best time. It is not because of you or because of me, it's because of our luck that the entire country's demographics are aligned in such a way, right? So if you actually think about it, like in the last 2000 years, India was actually the richest country in the world. You should read Shashi Tharoor's book as well if you want to. barring the last 300 years where the British were occupying us. So today, India is again getting back into the economic power, irrespective of the government. It's not because of the government, it is in spite of the government, whoever is there in the power. The point is, we are getting back there, but how will we get back? I mean, you read all these reports that says that in the next 10 years, India will overtake, this country. By 2050, India is projected to be number 2 after China, number 3 US. How will this happen, right? So in the next 30 years, so many people will start businesses. People who are in this room or in this virtual conference, a lot of people will start businesses that will become very big. A lot of jobs will be created. That's how a country actually grows. That's called growth, right? So I feel that there's a huge opportunity in front of you. And I should say, with the kind of academic credentials that you people have, a risk for you is not as big as a risk as it is for somebody with zero backing, right? My point is, if you start up something and you fail, still you get a job. And today, in fact, startup experience is actually more valued than corporate experience in startups. Again, not probably in corporates. Even corporates are starting to recognize it. So my point is, if you start something and you fail, well and good. I mean, you at least have that experience. And if you start something and it succeeds, then you will have like 20 times of the returns that probably you can actually expect, right? So I think it's a very good time to start up, and I would encourage a lot of people to start up. And my last words are that, as Rakesh sir was saying, that you after MBA you think that you know a lot of stuff, right? So whether you know or not doesn't matter. What matters to me is that you think that you know, and you think you can change. So as you grow older, like after 10 years after your MBA, you talk to your seniors who are 10 years into MBA, 20 years into MBA, 30 years into MBA. The ability of a person to think they can change the world will keep reducing, because reality hits you, your EMIs hit you, and you're in the reality, you married, and a lot of stuff happens. So that ability to think that you can actually change the world is actually the youthful optimism that makes people do great things, right? So that is what actually great ideas are made of, and the ability to actually believe that you can think you can change the world and you do it. So I think it's very important to continue to hold on to that ability. Doesn't matter even if people think you are foolish. So as Steve Jobs said, you should stay foolish and stay hungry, right? Stay hungry and stay foolish. So I think that's what will really give you a sense of satisfaction of whatever you do, whether you choose to be in a job or whether you become an entrepreneur. If you are working in an organization, you should not be a mercenary, right? So as Asha ma'am was saying, you should have longevity in an organization. At least you'll have a purpose for your life, that if you're working in an organization, you're working for a long time, you make a difference into that. Or you work in a short term and make a difference in that. Just don't work in an organization for 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and without making any impact. You just go, then what is the use of you in the entire world, right? So tomorrow, if you want to leave an organization, the organization should be in a position to stop you from leaving. That is when you know that you have made an impact, or else you're just one among one.
Absolutely.
What is your use in the whole world, right? So think about it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. For the participants, in case if any one of you have got more questions for our panelists, please send them through email, and they would be happy to answer them to you. So I thank each of our panelists as we come to the end of this session. And while ending the session, I would again end it with a quote by Michelle Dell, where she says that it's through curiosity and looking at opportunities in new ways that we've always mapped our paths. And I think this stands so true in this current scenario to all the entrepreneurs, where we've not stopped our journey when it was forced onto us. So I thank each of our panelists for joining in and giving us such amazing insights about the topic. And once again, thanking the IIM Visakhapatnam team to have us here for this discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shivkala, for an excellent moderation. Thoroughly enjoyed it. And I must say, I learned a lot from my esteemed co-panelists, Dr. Rakesh Sinha and Yashwant. All the best to all the students from IIM Visakhapatnam team.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And many of the students are connected on LinkedIn. In any case, I can see many familiar names. So whatever thoughts you have, or if you'd like to take this conversation forward, let's do it on LinkedIn. That's a good platform. And anytime you want to bounce off any idea, feel free to reach out.
Yeah, thank you
Thank you
speakers
all
for
very
joining.
much. It was a pleasure for me to sit along the esteemed panelists. Thank you, and also Shashikala ma'am for Shivkala ma'am for having a great. I'm sorry for the whole. Sorry. It's been a brilliant moderation by you for bringing out a lot of interesting viewpoints from everyone. And thank you. I am Vishakhapatnam for having us all on board. And I'm available on LinkedIn as well. M. Yashwant Nag is my name. If somebody has any specific queries, I'll be more than happy to reach out to people. Thank you all.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all the speakers. So there'll be a vote of thanks from Chanakya. So Chanakya, please take over.
So thank you everyone who have joined us this afternoon and made this panel discussion a success. And a special thanks to all the guests from students of IMB and particularly Epic Club and the Business Cluster. So I'm sure that we all have gained some valuable insights from the discussion. So to summarize a few points for takeaway, we have like the vision being a perpetual journey towards a mission to be accomplished, and the first customers acting as marketing agents for a successful startup, and implementation of an idea being more important than just having it. So these are a few points to mention, and I'm sure there are many more. And so let us bring this exciting discussion to an end, hoping that our learnings from here will be useful in various forms to deal with all the challenges we are yet to uncover. Once again, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks guests for your valuable time. And we are honored to have you.